Hi, welcome to this Preppers University online course, Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Wheat. I'm Lisa Bedford, the Survival Mom, and I am your instructor for this class today. Along with this recorded class in video form, there are also a few things and other resources that I'd like for you to take a look at. First of all, make sure you download the note-taking outline. That is going to follow closely what I cover today, and if you're a note taker, you'll appreciate having an organized format for you to jot down any insights that you get or anything that you want to remember in that format. Also, those finished notes can just be put into one of your files or binders for later reference. Along with that note-taking outline, there are two other downloads and printables for you. One is a nutritional qualities of grains, and this is an extensive chart that will compare and contrast the nutrition that you would find in grains such as einkorn, wheat, and other grains. And it is helpful if you are really studying nutrition as part of your food storage plan. The second, or actually the third document, is a wheat storage worksheet, and I will explain to you how to use that a little later on in this course. Finally, there is one article that will give you good background information when it comes to heirloom varieties of wheat, and that is a clickable article that you will see listed along with the items to download and print out. So let's get started. Very often the first question that people have when it comes to wheat is why? And as we move through the class today, we're going to be answering these four questions, beginning with why wheat. We'll discuss the types of wheat to store and use, bread making and other options. If you aren't much of a bread fan, if your family doesn't eat much bread, you may wonder, well, why am I learning about wheat? I'll tell you why when we get to that part of the class. And then finally, getting creative with wheat. There is a whole lot more to wheat than just baking bread. Bread is one of the most versatile grains in the world, and often we use it and we consume it in ways other than breads. In my family, we buy one loaf of Ezekiel bread, and it lasts us a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. Now, if you're a sandwich family, that probably comes as a huge shock. How can that be? But we just aren't big bread eaters. However, I do have a number of pounds of wheat stored in my food storage pantry because we use wheat not just for bread, but for rolls, most of the desserts, brownies. You can't make brownies, at least most varieties of brownies, without some sort of wheat flour. And of course, pastries, cooking, or cookies if you're much of a baker. However, you're also going to use wheat in things like tortillas and fry bread and bagels. In fact, most cultures that I can think of around the world utilize wheat in one form or another. As well, there are snack foods to make. You can make your homemade saltine crackers. You can make homemade Cheez-Its and homemade graham crackers. It really is amazing when you begin to dig in. Well, what all can I make with flour? What all can I make with wheat? And the list is pretty astonishing. In fact, though, wheat is one of the top 3 crops in the entire world, along with corn and rice. At the very bottom of this screen there, you see that there are some very healthy things that you can do with wheat. And we'll learn more about wheatgrass, wheat germ, and even sprouting wheat seeds. Probably the main reason that I have chosen to store wheat, besides its versatility, it has a very, very long shelf life. And you can see when we compare wheat with flour, why most people tend to go with wheat for their long-term storage. One friend of mine will stock up on flour every holiday season. You know, when they start putting out all the holiday baking groceries, you know, in the middle of the store, Kroger's, or wherever it is you shop. And she will stock up on flour at that time of year when it's at its very, very cheapest. And generally throughout the year when she needs all-purpose flour, she has it. And she stores it in plastic containers in her freezer, and it lasts a good long while. However, if you're looking at storing food for 5 years, 10 years or more, wheat is the best answer. So properly stored, it can last for decades. And we'll talk about proper storage at the end of this class. The nutrients aren't lost until the hull of the wheat is cracked. Unlike flour, over time it can lose its nutritious value. So when you're looking at a time, maybe, hard times in the future where maybe food is scarce, or maybe where your own money is so tight you can't buy a whole lot of groceries, that is when you're going to need nutrient-dense foods the most. And so with wheat, you're going to get that. The third point there under wheat is that you can grind it at different levels of coarseness for a variety of flours. And also wheat, there are different varieties of wheat that give you different results when you are cooking and baking. I have discovered that wheat is a very budget-friendly grain. I just checked recently with Honeyville, and Honeyville is a huge producer of food to restaurants as well as residents, just our food storage pantries or just for everyday cooking. And you'll find this interesting. Right now, Honeyville charges at their stores, their walk-in stores, less than $20 for 50 pounds of hard red or hard white wheat. Now, 50 pounds is going to give you close to 60 loaves of bread. So that is quite a bargain. Now, I want you to know, some of you who are Honeyville shoppers, Honeyville.com, I own a lot of their foods, but that same 50 pounds of hard wheat, when you buy it from the Honeyville website, is more than double the price. And so a lot of times I'll hear from readers, oh, Honeyville, it's, the shipping is so cheap, or it's free or something. And that you may get a bargain on shipping with Honeyville, but it is more than made up with the cost of the foods when you buy it from their websites. Another example, as of the recording of this class, I would pay $26 for 50 pounds of soft white wheat. I'll explain the difference between hard and soft wheat in just a moment. It's $26 for 50 pounds of soft white wheat if I walk into a Honeyville store, but it's $41 on the Honeyville website. So again, a big price difference. Now, you want to make sure when you buy wheat, it is budget friendly, but you want to shop around. One website that I have utilized is Azure Standard. And again, 50 pounds of soft white organic wheat. All of their wheats will be organic if that's what you're looking for. 50 pounds of soft white organic wheat goes for $44.95 in comparison to the $26 for 50 pounds with Honeyville. So you want to shop around. You want to check shipping charges. You want to check to make sure you're comparing apples with apples when you're going to buy, especially when you're going to want to buy a large amount. So those are some of the current prices of wheat that I have discovered. But it is budget friendly because you can do so much with it. And just in summary, when you find local sources, you can avoid the shipping charge. You can also verify how that wheat was grown. And asking around. Let me give you a few more tips here. Asking around at farmers markets. When you go to a farmer's market, even if no one is selling bread, but especially if they are, find out where they buy their wheat. That is a very good source. Local organic stores. When you go to a small store or even a larger store like Sprouts, find out who their supplier is of their wheat. And perhaps you might be able to buy directly from that supplier. Other possibilities when it comes to local sources, check out Craigslist. When I lived in Phoenix, I discovered by chance a family from Idaho who would come down to the Phoenix area every so often, and they would sell their fresh organic wheat. Sometimes they would have their homegrown honey and homegrown beans, but I initially started out with them just on wheat. So you might go to Craigslist and type in wheat. Another possibility is to combine your online order with other people and thereby sharing the shipping charges. I did that again when I first started stocking up on food for long-term food storage, and my shipping charges would be, maybe $15, $20 as compared to much, much more had it been only my order. You can always divide that order with other people. One of the suggestions on this screen says LDS churches and canneries. So you can contact a local LDS, that's the Mormon Church ward, ask them about wheat sources in your area. And because the Mormon Church has always encouraged food storage, and I am not Mormon, but I have worked with a lot of them in my years of doing food storage. I'm approaching about 9 years now. But do ask them where you can buy just local wheat. And you know, the nice thing about buying your wheat locally is that, as I mentioned earlier, you can talk to the farmer and you can find out, have you used pesticides? And I discovered when I spoke with a wheat farmer up in Idaho, northern Idaho, he said that no farmer wants to spread pesticides over their crops. He said he only has ever done that when it was absolutely impossible to avoid it. And in one case, he told me about a case where insects were coming in and they were eating like an acre of his wheat a day, and he had no other choice. But when you can actually touch base with that farmer, it really is going to go a long way to help you, reassure you as far as where you're getting your wheat from and how it was treated before you purchased it. Natural grocery stores like Sunflower Market or Sprouts or Henry's, there are other big chains and even smaller chains around the country. They carry wheat and they may call it wheat berries, but wheat berries is the same as the wheat that I'm talking about. Again, you might be able to work directly with their supplier. Now, for small amounts when you're first starting out, Bob's Red Mill is another online source. You can go to bobsredmill.com and you can buy their wheat or wheat berries in small packages. If you have never used wheat in this form before, I would recommend doing that, because there's no point in buying a 50-pound bag of wheat if you have never once used wheat. The only bread you ever have purchased is in the bread aisle at the grocery store. So you want to make sure that you know what you're getting into before you make a huge purchase. And again, if going back to that, if you've never seen real wheat, just buy a small amount and then borrow a grain mill from someone. Because the first time, if you've never done it before, you put that wheat in and out comes flour. It's almost a magical moment. It seems, wow, it just transforms itself into flour. Well, that is what flour is. Flour is ground up wheat. So, but you're just venturing into this. See what you can, see how small you can start. Don't start by buying a $300 or $400 grain mill and 50 pounds of wheat. Another possibility is, and we'll get to talk about this ancient variety in a minute, but that's einkorn, E-I-N-K-O-R-N. And as more Americans have become more sensitive to wheat, I know the book Wheat Belly has convinced an awful lot of people to delete wheat entirely from their diets. I'm not really a pro-wheat person. I'm just giving you this information because traditionally it has been a big part of food storage. But more and more I'm beginning to see other varieties of wheat come around, and one of those is einkorn, because it's possible other varieties may not have the same effect on people who have gluten sensitivities or other health issues with wheat. And you can find einkorn pasta at health food stores, and you might even ask a health food store owner if they have different kinds of wheat and pasta and bread and so on. Make sure that as you go, you're going to store your wheat as best you can. We'll talk more about that later. And a bakery supply company may very well have wheat in bulk, and you can purchase from there. And then finally, I want to talk about something that is a little bit controversial, and that is buying livestock feed wheat. Now, if you look, or you can imagine, a huge field of wheat, you know that some of that is going to be made into bread. Some of it is going to be made into Oreo cookies, homemade chocolate chip cookies, tortillas, and the like. But a big portion of that is going to be used as feed for livestock animals. It's all growing in the same field. The main difference between livestock feed wheat and what you would buy typically all nicely packaged from Bob's Red Mill or Honeyville or some other source is just how clean or how cleaned up that wheat is. So livestock wheat will have bits of grass in it. Will probably have some of the chaff from the wheat. It's not going to be really clean. However, if it has been grown in the same field as all the other wheat, and as far as the farmer or the supplier can tell you no pesticide has been used on it, it really is the same thing. So that is another possibility. And before you make that purchase, though, I would definitely say talk to the feed store owner, find out where he or she gets their feed wheat, and even see if you can talk to the original supplier, the farmer himself or herself, to learn more about it before stocking up. But I wanted you to know that that is a possibility. Some people, when they first get into food storage, they want to stock up on a whole lot really fast. Well, that would be one way to do it. As far as I mentioned the good current prices, it is really one of the foods for food storage. And if you look at its the just basic nutrition of wheat, you see that it really does provide an awful lot of numerous nutrients. It does provide protein, a small amount of fat, fiber in a diet, carbohydrates, and so on. And finally, hold on one second, allergies and health issues, as I mentioned before, that is a possibility. If you have discovered that you have sensitivities to wheat and you already have buckets and buckets of this stuff, just say to yourself, well, I'm ready to barter. And you will be. And also another possibility is to turn that wheat into baked goods or goods that you could maybe trade and barter the loaves of bread, or barter cookies, or barter some other food that you make. You could even perhaps barter wheatgrass or wheatgrass juice, something like that. So you want if you have discovered that you know wheat isn't really good for you, and you don't, now you have hundreds of pounds of wheat. Well, don't get discouraged. Just realize that you can put it to use in other ways. Now, if you are going to store wheat, you've got to know what to do with it. That was my mistake when I first started out. I was gung-ho buying wheat. I was buying wheat up a storm. And then one day I sat down and I thought, I don't know what to do with all this wheat other than grind it and turn it into flour. So here is where the beauty of wheat does come in. When you're deciding what to do with your wheat and you're learning how to bake with it and cook with it, there are two different kinds of wheat to learn about. Hard wheat and soft wheat are the two main categories. Whenever you use yeast, a yeast recipe, you're going to want to use hard wheat. Hard wheat is your go-to wheat. So if you're looking online and you cannot decide what am I going to buy, it's the hard red wheat and spring wheat versus winter wheat, what am I going to buy? Well, and then of course there's soft wheat, soft white wheat. Hard wheat is really the multi-purpose. Soft wheat is going to be your go-to wheat for things like pastries. If you're going to be making cookies, if you're going to be making pie crust, you'll want soft wheat for that. Now, in most households, we do less of that baking than we would bread. But that's for you to decide. But I would say if you're going to be deciding, well, what do I buy first? First, buy the hard wheat. And try your hand at grinding flour with the hard wheat and making a loaf of bread, and just see what you think of it. Soft wheat can come later, but I do have both. Out of all the wheat that I have, I probably have 2/3 hard wheat and about 1/3 soft wheat stored. And you can see there just what the difference is. And by the way, depending on where you buy your wheat, that hard wheat, soft wheat, white wheat, red wheat, they can all look very, very much alike. So you want to make sure that you label your wheat. Otherwise, you may pull out some soft wheat and you're getting it ready for bread, and you add your warm water and your yeast, some honey, and it's going to be awesome. And when it comes out of the oven, it just isn't quite right. So you want to make sure that you do label those. Going back to just real briefly the red versus white. If you're used to buying whole wheat bread at the grocery store, Roman meal or something like that, when you use hard white wheat, it doesn't give you the Wonder Bread type of bread. You're not going to get that really soft, cushy, squeezy white bread that you get at the grocery store. No, the hard white wheat will give you something that is a little bit closer to what like more of a quote unquote natural bread might be at a grocery store. So the hard red wheat is going to be more dense. It's going to be more hearty in flavor. More people than not prefer the hard white wheat over the hard red wheat. One of the categories that you see here is spring versus winter. Depending on where you buy your wheat, you may see winter wheat or spring wheat. Spring wheat has a little more protein and it has stronger gluten. Now, that may not be important to you if you're just an occasional baker, especially of bread. But if you have a real preference for how much gluten your wheat has, you may want to go for spring wheat. For myself, I just buy hard white wheat, hard red wheat, and don't worry too much at all about whether it was spring. Now, one possible option for wheat allergies is einkorn. Einkorn wheat, as I mentioned earlier, it's an ancient variety. In fact, it's believed that it's the very first type of wheat that was purposely sown and harvested for human consumption. Now you can buy it commercially. When I first began researching wheat about 8 or 9 years ago, einkorn was just barely on the radar. And now when I go to natural food stores, health food stores, I will find einkorn wheat and einkorn wheat products. So as you see here, it's genetically different from that in modern day wheat. It might be an option, kind of depending on any gluten, the type of sensitivity you might have. It might be an option if you want to have a little bit of wheat set aside for anyone in the family who is sensitive. Now, bread making and beyond, I promised you that I would give you some ideas for putting wheat to use other than the loaf of baked bread, and here we are. As you can tell, with the basic ingredients, you will want to store for baking a loaf of bread the items in the first column. It kind of depends on your own favorite bread recipe, because I know that some call for honey, some call for water instead of bread. Water instead of milk. It really is your own personal preference. In fact, one of my favorite recipes calls for dry milk. And you'll just have to try maybe just 2 or 3 different recipes, maybe more. But I don't know about you, but bread baking can be a lengthy investment of my time, and I don't really want, I'm not a professional baker. I don't have any interest in baking tons of bread. So I just tried 2 or 3 different recipes that were given to, handed down to me or recommended to me, and I found one that was easy. It was easy. I could make it either by hand or in the bread maker. It called for a little bit of honey and pretty much the ingredients that you see here. I used dry powdered milk in the place of liquid milk and a little bit of water. So as you can see here, all of these ingredients, the advantage is every one of those, whether you store flour, water, yeast, your wheat berries, salt, honey, milk, all of the items in that first column are easy to store, and all of them are very cheap. So that is another advantage to stocking up on wheat to bake for bread or other purposes, because generally the other ingredients that you put combine with wheat to make tortillas, for example, or to make crackers, they are all very budget friendly. And so you can make any number of foods without breaking the bank. A word about yeast, and I mentioned the 2 types to store, or the rapid rise and the instant type of yeast. And here's where it gets a little bit tricky for those of us who want to store things long term, because yeast definitely has a shelf life. Yeast does not last forever. So when you buy that package or that pound of yeast, you want to make sure you store it in a refrigerator. You want to store it somewhere cool until you use it. But know that depending on how it was stored and maybe the date that you buy it versus the date that it was first packaged is going to determine the shelf life. So the very best habit that you could ever get into whenever you're going to make any recipe using yeast is just to learn how to proof your yeast. It is no fun to go through the entire process of making yeast and then discovering, oh my gosh, my yeast was bad, and all that work that I, spent in mixing up the bread and kneading the dough, waiting for it to rise, and all the steps you go through, only to find that the yeast really was not a very active yeast to begin with. And I just simply go through the steps down here at the bottom. Just measure out the yeast you're going to be using for the recipe, mix it with warm water, a tiny pinch of sugar, and in just a few minutes, it should turn foamy. And if it does, you can just pour it into the recipe and you're good to go. If it doesn't bubble, if you don't see any foam on top, then you'll know that is not, that's not a good package of yeast, and you're going to have to buy another one, or just look for something else in your storage pantry. I do store 2 or 3 pounds of yeast at a time, but another option is to learn how to catch, as they say, catch wild yeast. And that is going to be one of the do-it-yourself, the DIY projects, part of our advanced prepping course, just catching wild yeast and using it. Because if you think about a really severe emergency, a severe crisis that goes on for weeks, months, maybe years at a time, where just as typical Americans, we just have to learn to do without, then where are you going to get the yeast from? And if the grocery store is not stocking it, you'll need to learn how to make your own, or not really make your own yeast, but catch this wild yeast, something like a sourdough starter, if you've ever done that before. Now, before I get into deciding how much wheat you should store, because it's dependent on different variables, I want to point out a couple of things about wheat for those of you that might have decided, we're not bread eaters, I don't like gluten, I read Wheat Belly, I'm just not interested. You know what? In a crisis, a big crisis, very uncertain future, maybe a worst case scenario, you may end up, you and I both, since I've already told you we don't eat much bread, we may end up wanting and needing more bread than we use right now. During the Great Depression, as I was doing research a couple of years ago, it was amazing how much families during those years depended on bread. Anything possible, anything that you could catch practically went in between 2 pieces of bread to make a sandwich. It added calories. The wheat does have some protein. It's very filling. 1 loaf of bread can go a long way. Very often, recipes for bread can make 2 or 3 loaves at a time. So it's something where you invest the effort, you invest the labor, but then you have enough food. You have this food product to last for several days. So before you just kind of give up on wheat, you might want to think about that. One of my friends, as she has stocked up on wheat, she's a food storage expert in my eyes. She just says she plans on a loaf of bread about every other day for her family. I believe they're a family of 4. So your needs may vary, but kind of now when we have the luxury of buying, Ezekiel bread or some kind of specialty bread, or we really, we're getting our calories and our nutrients from so many other sources in a very varied diet, that may not be the case at some point in the future. So just food for thought there. All right, so get out your calculator. One of the downloadables and printables for you as part of this class is a wheat worksheet, where you are going to decide what percentage, do you want to have more white wheat, more red wheat, more soft wheat. It really depends on how you currently eat and what you think your needs might be in the future. There's really no set answer there, no correct answers. I would encourage you to go and, as you're thinking and planning, go beyond the loaf of bread and say, well, it's really easy to make fry bread. It's really easy to make tortillas. It's really easy to make fry, for some kind of a flatbread or whatever. The more of these other bread alternatives that you know how to make, the more variety you'll have for your family's diet and your meals. Less boredom, not sandwiches every day, and you'll still be putting that wheat to use. So take that into consideration instead of just, kind of getting stuck in a box where we're only going to be making bread. There's so many other alternatives. So in the worksheet, you're going to be selecting, what I suggest you do is select 2 or 3 of your favorite recipes, different kinds of bread, how many loaves a week, and then you're going to multiply each ingredient accordingly. So if you're going to be eating 1 loaf of bread per week and you want to plan for 3 months worth, now you're going to be saying, well, all right, I'm going to be making about 12 loaves of bread. How much wheat do I need for that? How much salt, how much honey, how many eggs, and so on. And that will give you a good picture of how much you need to store. And the wheat worksheet will take this even further and give you some more guidance there. Bread making resources, I will have these also on the website. You'll see these links as part of this course. But there are excellent websites that will give you more information than you could ever put to use when it comes to bread making. And the books and videos that I recommend, they're right there, including 2 YouTube channels devoted to baking and baking bread in particular. So once this class is over, this is an overview of everything you wanted to know about wheat, but obviously it's not everything you ever wanted to know about baking with wheat and putting wheat into action. Now, one of my favorite ways of using wheat, because I told you we're not big bread eaters, however, I do like cooking wheat berries whole. It's the easiest thing to do. You can cook them with plenty of water in a saucepan, and you can simmer and cover it and simmer it until the berries are nice and chewy. And then if there's any water left over, you just drain it in a little colander. You can rinse the berries, and then, gosh, you can add them to soups. You can add them to stews. You can put them in chili for a vegetarian chili. You can add them to salads. You can add them to chicken, chopped up chicken for a chicken salad. There is so much that you can do with cooked wheat or cooked wheat berries. If you go online and you look for wheat berry recipes, you're going to find lots of them. One of my favorite salads has the wheat berries, kale, baby spinach, red onion, oranges, dried cranberries, and kind of a sweet salad dressing, and it's just excellent. So again, another reason to not snub wheat entirely. Another possibility is sprouting wheat. Sprouting seeds is one of the easiest things you'll do. And we will have an online class here at Preppers University about sprouting seeds. It's a very, very easy way to add a wealth of nutrients to your diet, especially if you're going to be relying on your food storage. You can pull out your supply of wheat and transform them into wheat sprouts. You can do the same with all the varieties of beans that you have, and suddenly they become bean sprouts. They can go in salads, on sandwiches, on top of soups. There's so many different ways to use sprouted seeds. And what was fascinating to me is this first point, that as that sprout grows, the nutrients change. So if you're like me and you have thought about a future where, food was maybe not, it's not plentiful, especially the nutritious foods that we're used to now, consider using a portion or even setting aside a portion of your wheat specifically for sprouting. Very, very simple way to sprout is just in this picture, a canning jar, put a plastic mesh where the lid would go, put wheat and water in it, and you just soak it. And then once or twice a day, you just pour, just kind of let the water pour out through the mesh, fill it with fresh water, kind of swish it around, maybe drain that, fill it up with some more water, and then let it just drain, rinse, and then you let it sit in a sunny area, and before you know it, literally within a day, 2 days, you have sprouts ready to go. And finally, wheatgrass. Wheatgrass is interesting because it is extremely nutritious, and if you have gone to smoothie stores, maybe around town, different places that have homemade smoothies, very often you can pay extra for a shot of wheatgrass juice. And a friend of mine whose brother was a naturopathic chiropractor, he told her that a 1/4 cup a day of wheatgrass juice would take care of all the nutrients she would need for the entire day. So the YouTube videos, there are plenty of them with how to grow your own wheatgrass, many different health claims about what it can do for you. And again, just like sprouting wheat, it's a very easy process that requires minimal supplies. So you could start growing wheatgrass, today. if you happen to have just some very simple supplies and the wheat to do that. So this has been an overview of wheat. And in a crisis, it's easier to store wheat and other grains and seeds than vitamins and nutritional supplements. It will have a much longer shelf life. When fresh produce isn't available, sprouts are, as long as you have seeds, beans and seeds. They're ready to consume. Those sprouts are ready to consume in just a few days. And then, no matter what it is you store, you have to follow these 6 rules to get the longest possible shelf life. A dry place, a cool place. It should be dark. Protect the food from oxygen. Watch out for pests. They can ruin your food. In fact, if you ever have a container of wheat and maybe as you kind of get down toward the bottom, you see empty wheat hulls, that lets you know that insects have been dining on your wheat berries. And then rotate by using your older food first. Okay, that brings this online class to a close, and we have other food storage classes for you. Thanks so much for being a member of Preppers University. I hope that our classes have helped you, and these online classes have given you even more information to fill in the gaps. If you have a suggestion for an online class just like this one, please let us know by emailing us at preppersuniversity@gmail.com.